Hi everyone, my name is Claire Hancock, and for this presentation I will be going over Parkinson's disease. I will start with what Parkinson's disease is, and then I'll go through some history, the signs and symptoms, diagnosis, etiology, treatment, prognosis, and then I'll add a few personal accounts, and then we will look at the biblical perspective of this disease. Before we get into the bulk of Parkinson's disease, I wanted to talk about the importance and prevalence of this disorder. So it's a neurological condition, and neurological conditions are the leading source of disabilities worldwide, and more than 6 million individuals have Parkinson's disease. This statistic was calculated in 2016, and it is 2.4 times higher than it was in 1990. And so the prevalence of Parkinson's disease has been projected to double over the next 30 years. So I think this really emphasizes the fact that this disorder is really impacting a lot of people and a lot of families, and so it's something that individuals should be educated on. First, we're going to go over what Parkinson's disease is, and throughout my research, I found that it's a very complicated condition. Most of the articles that I read about Parkinson's did state that it was complicated, but the formal definition that I gathered is that Parkinson's disease is the most common form of Parkinsonism, which is a group of neurological disorders with Parkinson's disease. Movement such as rigidity, slowness, and tremors. And the symptoms of Parkinson's disease are due to dopamine deficiency. So that's the number one thing about Parkinson's. That's what causes the tremors, the shaking, and the unsteady movements of the individuals who are diagnosed. But overall, this disorder has a lot of neurological components, which we will get into in the etiology. In researching the history of this disorder, I found that some traditional Indian texts from before 1000 BC and some ancient Chinese sources provide descriptions that suggest Parkinson's disease. I thought this was really interesting how this has been something that individuals have been struggling with for a long time. But the first detailed description of Parkinson's disease was made about 2 centuries ago, but the understanding of this disease continues to evolve and grow, especially with the advancements in modern medicine. But the first clear medical description was written in 1817 by James Parkinson. In looking at the signs and symptoms of this disorder, I found that there were 2 categories, the first being motor and the second being non-motor symptoms. The first category of motor symptoms is kind of well known when thinking about Parkinson's disease. A lot of people associate tremors, stiffness, slowness, and imbalance with the disease. But the second category is the non-motor symptoms, which I thought were interesting, and that it can affect many organ systems, which can result in a loss of smell and constipation, which I thought was extremely interesting. The diagnosis of Parkinson's disease has been and remains challenging because there's a lot of clinical features of this disease that overlap with other neurodegenerative conditions. So diagnosis for Parkinson's is based solely on the individual's history and their physical examination, which can make it difficult to pinpoint whether this is Parkinson's or a different neurological disorder. And there's a lack of sufficient definition of Parkinson's subtypes, which also make the diagnosis difficult because Parkinson's can be different for each individual who experiences it. In looking at the etiology or causes of this disorder, Parkinson's disease is not really well understood, but it's likely to involve genetic and environmental factors, such as how we talk about in class, how there's a multipath model to everything and there's not just one specific cause to a disorder. Parkinson's is the same way. And I wanted to note that men do have a higher prevalence rate of Parkinson's disease than women, which I found interesting, and then the age of onset is an average of 60, but chances increase with age. So as an individual ages, they have a higher chance of being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And then several genes cause Parkinson's disease, which have been identified in aggregation studies to support there's a genetic component to Parkinson's. But in looking at the lifestyle and environmental factors, there's not a consistent finding concerning protective measures that includes things such as diet or exercise. Things like that are not really protective factors against Parkinson's, but I thought that was something important to note, that doesn't always have anything to do with it. Typical treatment for Parkinson's disease includes medication and therapy. It's a combination of both typically. Medication, there's limited options for that, but medicine is to treat the symptoms such as the tremors and the imbalance, but it's not curative. So this disorder is chronic. It cannot be cured in a way, but all of the medicine is just to increase the dopamine in an individual, or to help store that dopamine well so that the tremors are decreased. But also therapy, the physical and occupational therapy are both utilized for individuals with Parkinson's, just kind of dependent on what the individual has more problems with. And there is a body of growing evidence that suggests physical and occupation therapy help reduce disability and increase the quality of life. Individuals are able to have a better sense of balance with things such as physical therapy, and if they undergo occupational therapy, they're looking at more of the minor muscle movements in the body, such as things that they use for writing and eating, like moving the utensil and things like that. But I'll go more into occupational therapy and physical therapy in the next few slides. In physical therapy, the areas of work include posture, balance, reaching, and grasping, so the bigger muscle group kind of things. So you can see in the photo that the individual is working on grasping and being able to keep their grasp on the little balls that they're using. But a potential drawback to this is that tasks in physical therapy are task and concept specific. So this means that tasks that are trained do not really generalize to related activities. So if the individual is focusing on stepping up, like on a staircase or something like that, it doesn't translate into other areas of their life or their daily routine, such as going up an incline. That is a different, distinct challenge for the individual. Occupational therapy, however, is typically utilized in later stages of the disease and with more severe cases. So occupational therapy includes working on fine motor skills, such as moving a utensil from the individual's bowl to their mouth and things like that, to kind of help control those tremors and shakes, and to work on things such as writing, which is more fine motor skills that the individual has troubles with because of the symptoms of Parkinson's. In looking at the prognosis for Parkinson's disease, the progression of the disease is dependent upon the individual. It's not like a one-size-fits-all, but as the disease progresses, non-motor symptoms can cause an increased burden, which can reduce the quality of life for that individual, and it could mean that the individual is required to have care 24/7, which can be a problem if the individual is struggling with financial things and cannot really afford things like that. So it can just be an overall burden on the individual and sometimes the family of that individual with the disorder. Next, I wanted to give a personal account. I interviewed my grandfather who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and dementia, and so I wanted to give a little bit of a day-to-day information and some of the personal struggles and things that he's had with Parkinson's, because I know we've looked at a lot of research thus far, but I wanted to kind of give a more personal light to this. This is a photo of my grandpa I wanted to add right after he'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's. So I asked what it's like to live with Parkinson's, and he said it's a long process of diagnosis, which I kind of already touched on, but it could be mentally and physically straining for the individual. And he talked about how like his symptoms can increase with stress. Like when he feels an overwhelming sense of stress, the tremors get worse, and he can also get the shakes, is what he called it, which are controlled by medicine. But if an individual skips like a time when they're supposed to take their medication, the shakes can be kind of bad in that way. He was also encouraged to keep active. He does physical therapy, which has been really helpful, and he does a lot of gardening, which keeps him up and keeps his like fine motor skills kind of in touch, if that makes sense. But he did note that writing was difficult and has been an issue, kind of keeping a train of thought, which could be tied to the dementia. But he uses heavy forks and spoons to decrease the problems of eating and decrease the shaking and the spillage that can happen when an individual is shaking with food on their utensil. He cannot drive, and he talked about how that was really frustrating for him, and he does go every 6 months to see the neurologist to see if the medication needs to be increased or decreased. But the cause of Parkinson's was Agent Orange. He's a Vietnam veteran, and he said that when he was in Vietnam, they would spray Agent Orange on the individuals, and they didn't realize the neurological effects that could have. And I thought this was really interesting, and it was something I wanted to note because I didn't find anything about this in my research. So I just think that that's something interesting to add to this and kind of give a personal account of why my grandpa thinks that he has Parkinson's disease. Lastly, I wanted to add a biblical perspective. I saw in my research in an article by Reynolds that spirituality is a coping mechanism for individuals with Parkinson's disease, and religion can be a coping mechanism for anyone, especially if they're diagnosed with something that's chronic and they can't really treat or cure in that way. But in a study conducted by Carey and Kellerman, the symptoms that individuals with Parkinson's disease experience have not reduced their religious belief. So if an individual is religious, I think this article is kind of implying that it doesn't turn them away from God, but more of it turns them to God in a sense. And I wanted to add a Bible verse that I thought was really impactful throughout my research with Parkinson's disease, and it's 2 Corinthians 4:16. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. I thought this was really powerful and could be a really encouraging message to anyone struggling with Parkinson's disease, whether they're Christian or not. It just kind of gives like a sense of hope because they're being renewed spiritually day by day, even though their physical bodies are decaying, and this is something that's not treatable. Overall, I really enjoyed researching Parkinson's disease, and I was able to learn a lot about this disorder as it is something that is really close to my home and to my heart. I hope you were able to learn something from this video. Thank you for watching.